Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the point is where what Mr. Cooper laid out is this is about the government's record and the seriousness in which they take questions of privilege, and in the case here of document production. So yes, sadly, there are many questions of privilege being dealt with. Our committee deals with them and is primarily tasked with dealing with them. But in terms of the relevance, it's absolutely relevant when we look at other document production requests that the government has, and Mr. Cooper laid out, the government incorrectly asserting yesterday that they are providing all the documentation on a question of privilege when they're not. So it is absolutely relevant to this of showing and demonstrating that the government is not taking document production seriously, including in this question here before us, and another one that's ongoing right now. So I think it's absolutely relevant to get the scope and a confirmation from the law clerk who's here about whether the government on other questions of privilege, other requests for document production is meeting that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. Mr. Gerritsen.
Well, notwithstanding the fact that I would love to engage in this discussion with Mr. Cooper, because I would love to read out about how Larry Brock, a Conservative member, has made comments to the effect of, if you want to get a document, you go to court and ask for warrants for production of works, of documents. I'd love to get into that discussion too, and notwithstanding that, perhaps Mr. Cooper and I will have another opportunity to debate that at another time, but I would completely concur with the comments from Mr. Turnbull, and to be fair, your initial assessment of this, Mr. Chair, of trying to find where the relevance is here. The only thing both Mr. Cooper and Mr. Duncan have been able to offer is that, well, they both have to do with questions of privilege. And to Mr. Turnbull's point, and to your initial assessment of this, that is not displaying, they have not in any way whatsoever shown you what you asked for, which is to demonstrate where the relevance is.
Okay, thank you very much, folks, for your contribution. So, colleagues, this is what I'm going to do. Mr. Bedard, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond as you see fit to the discussion that we've been having briefly. Mr. Cooper, I'm going to ask, when the clock has been stopped, when the floor returns to you, that we look at bringing our line of questioning back into what we've invited our witnesses to have here today. So let's just provide the opportunity.
Point of order?
Yeah, Mr.
Are
Gerritsen.
you extending this opportunity to everybody then? So when it's my turn, will I be able to ask a completely irrelevant question, but then the follow-up questions will have to be relevant? I just want to know so that I'm well prepared.
I may reject the premise of that, Mr. Gerritsen, but my rulings will be consistent. So I am going to afford Mr. Bedard just an opportunity to respond. Let's see where we can get here. But Mr. Cooper, if following that response, we can try to bring us back to specifically the question of cyber attacks. I think that would be in all of our best interests. Mr. Bedard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As regards a comparison between the current study and the question of privilege that is currently debated in the House, I will note a few things. First of all, for the current study, this committee has received an order of reference from the House. So the motion, the privilege motion, has been passed, and this committee has been entrusted with the study. Secondly, the motion that the committee itself has adopted in May 2024 contemplated that government entities could make redactions. So the documents that were provided by the House, by other government entities, they included redactions, and at the House we were very mindful when we made the redaction of the fact that these had been authorized and actually asked by the committee. Now, if we go to the question of privilege that is currently before the House and my letter of yesterday to the Speaker, which was tabled in the House on the same day, it's in line with the other letter that I provided to the Speaker. Documents have been ordered by the House on June 10. The order from the House did not contemplate any redaction. Some documents were withheld or contained redactions. In relation to previous letters, with that information before the House, a question privilege was raised, and the Speaker ruled that it constituted prima facie question privilege and allowed the appropriate motion to be moved that the matter be referred to this committee. I'll note that the Speaker also noted.
So Mr. Bedard, just on the matter of the documents that have been recently presented or produced and filed with you from ISED, from the National Research Council and from Statistics Canada. Those documents contain redactions, and some have been withheld from you, correct? Relating to the Green Slush Fund. Okay. And so what you're confirming is that neither the House of Commons or the RCMP have all of the documents due to the government blacking out certain documents and withholding others, correct?
Excuse me, could you repeat this question, the last question?
Well, you're just confirming that you don't have all the documents, correct?
Based on the information I received from the government entities themselves, they put in their letter that some documents were withheld, and also just on the face of the documents, there are some redactions. So
That's right. And thank you for that. And I would note that Karina Gould yesterday on CBC asserted that all documents have been produced related to the Green Slush Fund. The government has turned over all documents. Let the record show that Karina Gould lied about reduction of documents.
Mr. Turnbull, the floor is yours on a point of order.
I have to bring up relevance here because Mr. Cooper is referring to something else that is being currently debated in the House that I would note is being filibustered by the Conservatives for over 23 days now because they don't want that to actually be referred to this committee. But more importantly, this meeting is about a question of privilege related to cyber attacks targeting members of Parliament, which I thought was a serious issue that the Conservatives cared about. Obviously, Mr. Cooper has no questions with regard to this question of privilege, the one that this committee is supposed to be studying today. So I wonder if we can move on from his political attacks that are clearly not in line with what we're supposed to be talking about today.
Point of order.
Yes.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. I have 2 points of order. First, Mr. Gerritsen, and then Ms. Gaudreau, and then I have something to say. Mr. Gerritsen.
Had not just an initial response from Mr. Bedard, but we've also had an exchange, and more went back and forth. So the door is swung wide open right now in terms of not having to be relevant. I would just like a ruling from you, Mr. Chair, as to whether or not you're shutting that door and you're going to force everyone to be relevant from this point, or whether we're going to continue on down this same path of entertaining, possibly entertaining in order to determine where to go. I think it's fair to everybody who needs to ask questions after this point, because I will completely change my questions if you're going to permit that kind of behavior for the rest of the meeting.
I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Gerritsen. Colleagues, what I was seeking, and Madame Gaudreau, I know that I have to come to you in a moment. Colleagues, what I was seeking was a compromise to help us start the meeting off in a place that could create some efficiency. I share the view raised by Mr. Turnbull and Mr. Gerritsen and previously by Ms. Matheson that at this point I'm seeing a divergence from relevance. Mr. Cooper does have a little bit of time remaining, so Mr. Cooper, when the floor does get returned to you, my hope is that you are going to bring us back to APT 31, or I will interject at that point because I do believe that we're veering a little bit too far off course. Madame Gaudreau, à vous.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I recognize your capacity to try to arrive at a compromise. And I think in the current context, we have to assume our responsibilities. We're dealing with a subject which is very important, and we'd like to get through it today with a number of witnesses here. So I'm making a call out. Please, partisanry, not at the committee. You have plenty of opportunities in the House. We have 45 minutes left on the first hour, but I think the door is far too widely open. And let's try to get back to the actual topic. As I said, I agree totally. So we will give the floor to Mr. Cooper. He's got a few seconds left. And we will decide if it's relevant or not.
Mr. Chair, last week the House of Commons provided the committee with 3 additional documents. One is an email dated June 30th, 2022 from cyber incident at CSE to the House of Commons IT security containing a cyber event report. The report references a cyber attack that occurred on between January 4th and 28th of 2022 targeting individuals who were outspoken critics of the Beijing-based communist regime. Is this cyber event report referencing a separate cyber attack, a continuation of the January 2021 progressive reconnaissance attack, or is the January 2022 date a typo that should read January 2021?
I'll ask my colleague Ed Benoit to respond to this question.
Good morning, Mr. Cooper. Yes, it is. I can confirm that the June 30th bulletin is a continuation of a series of bulletins that started in January.
So it relates specifically to the progressive reconnaissance attack from January of 2021.
It is a follow-up of the bulletins that were issued, a series of bulletins that were issued in January 2021.
About 20 seconds here, Mr. Cooper.
Okay, thank you. It was represented in evidence that the attack was stopped in January of 2021. Can you confirm that that was the case, that there wasn't a subsequent attack from ATP 31 in 2022 or at any other later point in time beyond January of 2021?
I can confirm that the date range that were in the initial bulletin were wrong, and we confirm that these were related to the 2021 attack. So confirmed by our partners that the date range should have indicated in the bulletin that it was the 2021 attack.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Cooper. Madame Fortier, 6 minutes. Issue here. That's not what I'm asking the clerk about. I'm just going to turn the floor to her to respond directly to Mr. Cooper's question. There's no relevance issue.
Mr. Cooper and members of the committee, I reached out to CSC yesterday, and they informed me that they still had a substantial amount of documents that they still need to send to the committee, and that they agreed to give me a timeline to receive those by the end of this week. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Clerk, for that answer. And let me just say that this is completely unacceptable that the government is withholding documents, a substantial number of documents apparently, from this committee 3 months after they were ordered. They had a deadline of August 9th. And so therefore I'm going to move the following motion: that in relation to its order of reference of Thursday, May 9th, 2024, regarding the prima facie contempt concerning the People's Republic of China's cyber attack against members of Parliament, the Committee A, make the following interim report to the House. Your committee wishes to express its displeasure with the refusals to give evidence by the Minister of National Defence and his predecessors, the President of the King's Privy Council for Canada, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, and President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Transport, who each held responsibility for the communication security establishment at times material to the question of privilege, which the House referred to your committee on Thursday, May 9th, 2024, concerning the People's Republic of China's cyber attack against members.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair. I think that the process is okay, but unfortunately we do not have a hard copy for the interpreters. No, you're quite right. Usually in a committee, ideally, if we have something provided in writing in advance.
Opportunity to finish reading in the motion. I'm then going to suspend to allow time for that motion to be distributed in both official languages. Reminder to colleagues, for the sake of our colleagues and our interpreters, it is appreciated, if possible, to try to distribute such information in advance, or at least have it ready to go. So, Mr. Cooper, perhaps your team can work on that while I turn the floor back over to you to finish. So, Madame Gaudreau, oui, je suis totalement d'accord.
I agree totally, Madame Gaudreau, and I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to repeat slowly if he can, and once he has read out his motion, we will suspend shortly.
Back about 2 sentences, begin from there slowly, and then when you're done, I know that there are Mr. Duncan and Mr. Berthoud have told me they'd like to speak to the motion, but that won't happen until we come back from suspension, which is simply to allow time for distribution. So, Mr. Cooper, if you can just finish the introduction, please.
Well, maybe I'll just start from the beginning, and just to add, for the committee's benefit, I do have a copy that will be distributed of the motion in both official languages.
Okay, I don't think the beginning's necessary. If you can just pick up 2 sentences before, and then we can suspend and get it to everybody.
Okay, well, I'll just start with what the committee, well, let me just start from the beginning. That in relation to its order of precedence of Thursday, May 9th, 2024, regarding the prima facie contempt concerning the People's Republic of China's cyber attack against members of Parliament, the committee, A, make the following interim report to the House of Commons. Your committee wishes to express its displeasure with the refusals to give evidence by the Minister of National Defence and his predecessors, the President of the King's Privy Council for Canada, and the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, and the President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Transport, who each held responsibility for the communications security establishment at times material to the question of privilege, which the House referred to your committee on Thursday, May 9th, 2024, concerning the People's Republic of China's cyber attack against members of Parliament. B, re-invite the Honourable Bill Blair, Minister of National Defence, to appear before the committee for 2 hours and insist that he appear within 2 weeks of the adoption of his motion. C, issue a summons to Dan Rogers, Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, to appear before the committee for 1 hour at a date and time to be determined by the chair within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion, provided that he be permitted to be accompanied by officials within his organization who are relevant to the committee's study. D, issue a summons to Caroline Xavier, Chief of the Communications Security Establishment, to appear before the committee for 1 hour at a date and time to be determined by the chair within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion, provided that she be permitted to be accompanied by officials within her organization who are relevant to the committee's study. E, instruct the analyst to include in the draft report content which is drawn from the evidence which was heard in camera, including documents produced in response to the order adopted by the committee on Tuesday, May 21, 2024, provided this content be appropriately marked in the draft so that the committee may determine which, if any, of the information to include in its report to the House, and therefore which information will be added to the committee's public evidence. And F, authorize the clerk to share electronically with any witness who appeared in camera a copy of the transcript of her in-camera evidence, notwithstanding the committee's routine motion related to in-camera proceedings, for the purpose of witnesses providing the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion their recommendations with explanations for redactions to protect security-related information, to assist the committee in determining which, if any, of the in-camera information to include in its report to the House, and G, prioritize completing the study notwithstanding any previous decision of the committee, and not proceed to any further business until the committee's report is tabled in the House.
Okay. Well, aside from the fact that, Mr. Cooper, you probably need to catch your breath, we also need to pause briefly in order to allow for the distribution of the motion in both official languages. Colleagues, I'm suspending briefly at which point, or at the point at which the clerk informs me that you've all received this in accordance with our policies. I'll gavel us back in and we will begin our debate on the motion. Suspended. Been called. Yes, Mr. Cooper had the floor, but as we know, on a point of order, a challenge to the chair can be raised. That's what occurred. I have no wiggle room on this. He's challenged the speaking order. So what's now going to happen is we are having a vote, which is to determine whether or not the speaking order is altered due to an issue with my assigning of the speaking order. Mr. Turnbull has done that. or has adequately followed procedure, I've called the vote.
Well, no, I think there needs to be some further clarification because Mr. Turnbull, when he challenged you, it was in relation to who was recognized after me. I was not finished speaking.
My understanding is that Mr. Turnbull is challenging the speaking order that I had identified as being Mr. Duncan, Mr. Bertud, Mr. Calkins, and then Mr. Turnbull.
Except that in order to get to the next person on the list, I would have to finish speaking, and I hadn't.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, just a moment. I'm going to check one more time with the clerk, and then I'm going to come back with my ruling here. Okay, colleagues, so here's the explanation. I'm going to do my best to make it clear. And I'm going to run through a hypothetical here. So Mr. Turnbull has challenged the chair in terms of the recognition of the speaking order. We are going to vote on that because that is within the scope of the standing orders.
Just on that.
Just one moment, Mr. Berton. Should I be overruled, Mr. Cooper would maintain the floor, but at which point it would then go to Mr. Turnbull if I'm overturned. So this is the ruling.
Mr. Speaker.
This is the ruling. Okay. So again, what Mr. Turnbull has done is completely kosher in accordance with the standing orders. Should I be overturned on the speaking order, it would go to Mr. Cooper and then to Mr. Turnbull. If I am not overturned, then the speaking order will remain as I had it originally in my judgment, which would be Mr. Cooper, Mr. Duncan, Mr. Bertud, Mr. Calkins, Mr. Turnbull. So we are going to vote, and the direction of where this goes will be based on that. Mr. Bertud, I'm going to very quickly entertain this, but colleagues, but just one second. Colleagues, it's very unusual for the chair to not go right to a vote once it's been called. So this is not something that I'm going to entertain, generally speaking, moving forward. So I'll turn the floor briefly to you, Mr. Bertud, and you will be the last speaker, and then we're going to the vote.
Monsieur le Président, on peut pas challenger.
Mr. Chair, we cannot challenge a proposal that hasn't been, you haven't taken a decision. You took no decision. You indicated that there was a list, but you didn't give your decision on that until you give the floor to Berthold. You can't challenge it because otherwise every note that you take is going to be challenged. It's not how we should be working. The decision is taken when you gave the floor to Mr. Duncan. And then Mr. Turnbull could say, hey, I was the next guy on the list. And you said, well, I have on my list so, but you didn't take a decision on that. That's not a decision. I have my list. We're going to start challenging every note that you take. You didn't decide to give the floor to Mr. Duncan or Turnbull yet. You haven't done that.
Oh, okay, so, Mr. Bertha, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take what you're suggesting at face value, but here I imagine is what's going to happen. Either way, Mr. Cooper is about to get the floor again. I presume Mr. Turnbull is then going to raise his hand, and now that I have indicated what the speaking list is, he's going to challenge it. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Mr. Cooper is going to get the floor, okay, and then we'll see where things go from there, and we will or we will not come back to this particular point. However, seeing that the time is now after 12, although I am sure that this is exhilarating for our witnesses who are here and have done a fantastic job of not contributing to the discussion, despite probably having some very interesting views, I'm going to ask our witnesses, I'm going to thank our witnesses. I'm going to relieve them of their duties here because we do have a second panel if and when we get to that. But I want to thank Messieurs Dicard, Bedard, Jantz, McDonnell, Leblanc, et Aubé. Gentlemen, I'm sorry that we were not able to get into a more substantive discussion with you around the table, but if anybody understands that things can happen in the context of a parliamentary sitting, it would be you folks. So thank you very much for your time. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
We haven't, okay.
The floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And here we have a situation where members of Parliament, 19 of them were, and senators, 19 parliamentarians, including members of Parliament and senators, were the target of a cyber attack by the Beijing-directed, Beijing-controlled ATP 31. Those members of Parliament were kept in the dark for 3 years by this government. This government knew about the ATP 31 attack when it happened in January of 2021. And notwithstanding that, there were no efforts made to inform members of Parliament that they were the target of the Beijing regime, no efforts to inform them so that they could take appropriate steps to protect themselves. Indeed, these members of Parliament and senators would have had no idea that they were the target of the Beijing regime but for an indictment out of the Department of Justice in the U.S. And it was only then that they became aware of the fact that they were the target. And that led to the finding of the Speaker of a prima facie question of privilege, which has now been referred to this committee. And I would note that while members of Parliament were kept in the dark, CSIS and the CSE and the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's own department, and multiple departments within this government had received briefings about the ATP 31 attack. And so, very simply put, there was a complete breakdown in notifying MPs. But this is part of a pattern because this has happened before. We know that this government was aware that sitting members of Parliament, including MP Michael Chong, were the target of the Beijing regime, and yet he was kept in the dark, resulting in a finding of the Speaker of a prima facie question of privilege, which came before this committee and which we studied. And so what we have is a government that has been less than transparent, that has failed to provide transparency and sunlight, and frankly has at times outright covered up and turned a blind eye to Beijing's interference. We have, in this case, or not in this case, but following what happened in the case of MP Chong, the Minister of Public Safety in May of 2023 issued a directive requiring CSIS to brief MPs if they are the target of foreign interference. It is interesting that following the issuance of that order, there was a briefing of multiple government departments, including the Prime Minister's Department, the PCO, about this ATP 31 attack, and notwithstanding the order of the House, those departments were briefed, but the sitting members of Parliament continued to be left in the dark. It raises questions about the effectiveness of this order and whether this directive is in fact being followed, because it doesn't appear to be something that is being followed by this government.
Point of order,
it seems
Chair.
to be.
Mr. Turnbull, on a
Mr.
point of
Cooper
order.
talks about dwelling in the dark. That's what his Conservative leader is doing by not getting a security clearance. Can he maybe answer why his leader, who we know that the Conservative leadership race included
Mr. Turnbull.
the People's Republic of China interfering in it, why he won't get a security clearance?
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. We're getting into debate there. I think you're a seasoned parliamentarian, so make sure that points of order are focused on legitimate points of order. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to address the point raised by Mr. Turnbull. And to that end, the Leader of the Opposition has been very clear. He'll take the same brief that the Washington Post received. He'll take the same briefing that the Prime Minister has received. But what he will not do is allow the Prime Minister to get this clearance, and then allow the Prime Minister to pick and choose which information is put before him, which may in fact be incomplete, which may not present the full picture, and then allow the Prime Minister to be an arbiter of whether he violated his oath of secrecy. The Leader of the Opposition isn't going to play the Prime Minister's game. If the Prime Minister was serious, he would release the names of all of the MPs who have wittingly collaborated with the Beijing regime, but he won't do that because we know that they sit in his caucus. And we know that the Prime Minister covered up the fact that one of his candidates, the now member for Don Valley North, received the assistance of the Beijing regime to help him secure the Liberal Party nomination. CSIS was aware of Beijing's interference at the time of the nomination. CSIS briefed key officials, top Liberals, including Jeremy Broadhurst, as well as the president of the Liberal Party of Canada. Four Liberals, four top Liberals, all of whom had the appropriate security clearance to receive that briefing to inform them that, yes, the member for Don Valley North, the then Liberal candidate, had been assisted by the Beijing regime. Jeremy Broadhurst thought it was serious enough that he briefed the Prime Minister the following day about that briefing. The Prime Minister, having been made aware that one of his candidates was being assisted by the Beijing regime, did nothing. He turned a blind eye to it, he covered it up, and allowed that individual to stand for office and get elected, and hoped that no one would find out. Madam Justice Hogue, in her report, concluded that the Prime Minister's inaction with respect to the now member for Don Valley North, who he had been briefed on, his failure to take action was due to his primary concern for his political concern. That is paraphrasing what Madam Justice concluded, that it was out of political motivation that the Prime Minister didn't act. And so there you have it. Madam Justice Hogue, the Commissioner of the Public Inquiry, who found that the Prime Minister put his political interests and the interests of the Liberal Party ahead of national security and ahead of countering Beijing's interference in our democratic processes. That's the record of this Prime Minister. It's also, by the way, with respect to the member for Don Valley North and security briefings, very interesting that the member was then tipped off that he was a target of CSIS. Mm-hmm. Now, that raises questions about who tipped him off. We know that 4 top Liberals received the briefing from CSIS, and we know that the Prime Minister was informed by Mr. Broadhurst about the contents of that briefing. And so the circle is actually quite small as to who may have tipped the member for Don Valley North off that he was a target of CSIS.
Oui, Madame Fortier.
Point of order, Madam Fortier. I understand that my colleague needs to speak at length on his motion, but I would like to remind him that on the agenda, we also have, we had witnesses, and they are wanting to talk about election reform, and they'd like to share their opinions with us. So perhaps if our colleague would like to pause for a moment and let us work for the next 45 minutes to try to at least hear from these witnesses for panel 2. If he chooses not to, well, he'll continue. But we did have an agenda, and I think if he's going to continue proving his point, thank you, Madame Fortier. It's
right, Madame Fortier, to share your viewpoint. However, Mr. Cooper has the floor, and it's up to Mr. Cooper to determine what he would like to, what he'd like to do with the floor. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And the member for Don Valley North had been tipped off, and there were...
Point of order, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Turnbull.
Mr. Cooper's intervention isn't even relevant to the motion that he's put on notice. It has nothing to do with the cyber attack that's in question in his motion. So I'm not sure what he's speaking to, but it's not relevant to the actual question of privilege that we've been debating.
So colleagues, here's what I'm going to do. Because it's worked in the past, so let's see if it works again. I'm going to suspend here briefly with the hope that the parties can come together and decide how we want to use the next 45 minutes or so of time. We do still have our witnesses present that have taken time out of their busy schedules to speak to us on a very important matter. That window is closing rapidly that we have to hear from them. So I'm going to suspend to ask the parties to negotiate some type of solution to the stalemate that we appear to be at right now. And then I will come back once I have an understanding of where that may go. Ms. Matheson?
If I may just ask a question, is there a possibility of extending or having more resources on an extension of time so that we do hear from the witnesses, if that's the choice to be made, considering...
Unfortunately, Ms. Matheson, no, we don't have the resources, so that's why it's particularly important that the committee members determine how they want the next 40 minutes or so to go. So based on what I just said, I'm going to suspend.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as I was stating before we suspended, that 5 Liberals, including the Prime Minister, had received directly or indirectly a briefing that the member for Don Valley North was assisted by the Beijing regime to help him secure his nomination. That member was tipped off by a top Liberal. Who is it? Was it Jeremy Broadhurst? Was it the Prime Minister himself? Which of these, was it Ismail, the president of the Liberal Party? Did he tip off the member for Don Valley North? It is a question that needs to be answered. Because
point of order, Chair.
Mr. Turnbull, on a point of order.
We at least apologize to the witnesses for the Conservatives' attempt to filibuster their own motion here, and just say we're really sorry to the witnesses for having spent their time coming here to testify and then be totally disrespected in terms of their time.
So colleagues, a couple of things. The first is I will take the opportunity, Mr. Turnbull, given the point that you raised, simply to let the witnesses know, as I believe the clerk has informed them of already. Unfortunately, we will not have the opportunity today to hear from them. I'm not going to offer my opinion subjectively as to why that is, but simply I'm sorry that we haven't had the opportunity to get to you. I do ask to colleagues and anyone in the room, we are in the middle of a proceeding, so if conversations can be taken outside, I would appreciate that. But again, we are moving forward with the proceeding as is, which will return the floor to Mr. Cooper.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think what's disrespectful is a government that continues to defy an order of this committee to turn over documents 3 months after the deadline has passed. I think that is disrespectful. I think what's disrespectful is a government that has failed to produce documents ordered by the House related to the Green Slush Fund, and to not only fail to turn over those documents involving a massive scandal involving the misuse of $400 million taxpayer dollars, but for the government House leader to go out on CBC and lie to Canadians, as she did yesterday, that the government was in compliance, when we heard today from the law clerk that no, in fact, the government is not in compliance with the order of the House. And I'll tell you what is not only disrespectful, but quite a bit worse, is the Prime Minister who was briefed that one of his candidates had been assisted by the Beijing regime, and the fact that he turned a blind eye to it, allowed that candidate to stand, kept the voters and Canadians in the dark. It speaks to a Prime Minister who then turns around and lectures the Leader of the Opposition about foreign interference when he's the one who's compromised and turned a blind eye to foreign interference.
Chair, could I do a point of order, please?
It never ceases to amaze me.
Mr. Cooper, I do have a point of order.
No,
of course, Mr. Turnbull, at any point, a member does have the right. However, the chair needs to determine whether or not there's relevance on that point of order. But I can't determine that, of course, until I hear what the point of order is.
I know Mr. Cooper's got his little misinformation propellers going pretty quickly, but maybe he could explain why PRC officials allegedly interfered in the leadership races of the Conservative Party of Canada while he's pontificating.
Colleagues. Okay, that's a nice volume level. Mr. Turnbull, that is not, unfortunately, a relevant point of order. You are veering into debate. With that, Mr. Cooper, I return the floor to you.
With the Prime Minister, it's projection all the time. Everything.
Point of order again, Chair. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Cooper. But
Mr.
point
Turnbull,
of order on relevance, Chair, and relevance is definitely a point of order that's in the Green Manual.
Explain.
Mr. Cooper is speaking to a number of other instances that he's speculating about that have nothing to do with his notice of motion. So the motion that he's moved says that in relation to its order of reference of Thursday, May 9th, 2024, regarding the prima facie contempt concerning the People's Republic of China's cyber attack against members of Parliament. So it refers specifically to a cyber attack. Mr. Cooper is not speaking about a cyber attack. He's speaking of other instances of potential foreign interference that he's citing. It has nothing to do with the cyber attack. So how is this relevant at all? It seems clear that Mr. Cooper's intention here is to waste the committee's time, valuable time that witnesses were asked to come to this committee to answer questions on another matter, and he's now just wasting the committee's time. So with irrelevant arguments.
Sure.
Point of order.
Okay. Thank you for your insight, Mr. Turnbull. I will keep my ear open to whether or not I believe the speaker is remaining relevant to the motion at hand, which is what we are debating. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Oui, Monsieur Berthold.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais juste mentionner à mon...
Chair, he only read a part of that motion. He could read it completely. Perhaps we'll see. Oh, Mr. Berthold, I know that you want to give yourself a break for your colleague, but if we determine that it's not an acceptable point of order, we're going to do the same for your point of order. Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I've got to say that when it comes to trusting this Prime Minister to be straight with Canadians about foreign interference and what he knows and so on, I would submit that he has a track record of not being trusted when he covers things up, when he doesn't come forward and be truthful, when he denies things until he's caught, when he appoints his former ski buddy, David Johnson, as his fake rapporteur, and then selectively gave that fake rapporteur only certain documents to look at about Beijing's interference so that he could get a predetermined outcome to his report, a report that was ultimately torn to shreds. It's no wonder that the Leader of the Opposition isn't going to say to this Prime Minister, who is a proven liar,
Point of order.
I'm going to trust you to
Point of order,
present.
Chair.
Yeah.
That directly violated the standing order rules on decorum. Calling another member of Parliament a liar is in direct contravention of our code of conduct here. and our rules of decorum. Chair, I would ask that Mr. Cooper withdraw that. If you could ask him, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Cooper, I do believe Mr. Turnbull is correct in his interpretation of the use of parliamentary language. So if we could just ask you, colleagues, I know moments of levity are important, but at the same time, I think for those that have stomached our discussion today, they probably do want us to get on with the business. But to Mr. Turnbull's point, Mr. Cooper, if I could ask you to, please withdraw the previous comment, which as a seasoned parliamentarian you know very well is unparliamentary language. And B, if you could please try to refrain from doing that in the future, I would gladly return the floor to you and hope that we can continue with the discussion you would like to have.
Well, withdraw, Mr. Chair, and I will rephrase to say that the Prime Minister has a proven record of misrepresenting the facts. And so no wonder the Leader of the Opposition isn't going to trust this Prime Minister to say, I'm going to give you what I want you to look at and maybe hide other things from you and give you an incomplete picture of things. But that's what the Prime Minister is proposing. And the Leader of the Opposition isn't going to take the Prime Minister's bait. He's not going to play the Prime Minister's game. The Leader of the Opposition has instead called on the Prime Minister to simply release the names of all compromised MPs, and the Prime Minister continues to refuse to do so, just as he covered up for the member for Don Valley North. So, no, the Leader of the Opposition will not take lessons, and Conservatives will not take lessons from this Prime Minister and from this government when it comes to foreign interference, because the record of this government is a shocking one in this regard, and it's drawn actually concern amongst our allies. International condemnation of the Prime Minister, and it's been said we have the Five Eyes. It's after 9 years of this Prime Minister, it's become increasingly the Four Eyes, where Canada has been left out, including look at AUKUS as an example, where our allies shut Canada out. And there are other instances, but that's what happens when you have a Prime Minister who has gone along with Beijing far too often and allowed Beijing to interfere in 2 elections, who turned a blind eye to the fact that one of his own members was compromised and he knew about it. The fact that Beijing has set up illegal police stations targeting Chinese Canadians. That's what has happened after 9 years of this Prime Minister. And with respect to the motion before us and the cyber attack on 19 members of Parliament, this is something that should concern all members of Parliament, because it was members in all political parties that were targeted and who were kept in the dark, who wouldn't have known but for an unsealed indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice that led to the ruling of the Speaker of the prima facie question of privilege, and this committee to undertake the study of the question of privilege. And we have had hearings, and we were at a point where we were about to, look to conclude this study until we discovered that there are a number of reasons why this study ought not to be concluded at this present time. And one is that this committee had ordered that this government produce documents and produce them by August the 9th. We received... Point of order? Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Duncan, on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. I'll make sure mine's certainly relevant. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I just want to have on the record for you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure when you may try to move adjournment, but we do not consent to adjournment. So I just want to put that on the record now.
It's not a point of order.
Knowing it's courtitude, but just note for that.
It is not a point of order. Perhaps, Mr. Duncan, if you do want to raise or draw my attention and the committee's attention to that, there'll be an appropriate time to do so. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And this committee ordered the government to turn over all documents in its control in relation to the cyber attack against these 19 parliamentarians. And the deadline was August the 9th. Prior to August the 9th, we received a batch of documents, primarily from the CSE, a few from CSIS, I believe, and they were heavily redacted, but nonetheless, there was information that was not redacted that raised further questions, including documents referring to or suggesting a cyber attack in October of 2022. That had not been made known to this committee. It's unclear what that cyber attack is in relation to, but I have it here under the CSIS Issues Management Brief from 2022, and it states it was sent to the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Public Safety, as well as NSIA, Minister of Public Safety, Chief of Staff. And the issue is it says CSIS intends to meet with select MPs and or their staff regarding cyber targeting of parliamentarians by People's Republic of China cyber actors. Background. In October 2022, CSIS became aware of an email campaign targeting the personal email addresses of parliamentarians and staff, along with other Government of Canada targets with malicious phishing emails. This campaign was likely conducted by PRC state-affiliated cyber actors. So, there we have, in the production from CSIS, reference to a cyber attack targeting, or seemingly to target, MPs, because CSIS was indicating that they intended to brief those MPs. And so there are questions about, is the ATP-31 cyber attack the only cyber attack that CSIS is aware of, specifically targeting MPs by the PRC or by other hostile foreign states? So we need to get clarification about that. And if, in fact, the ATP-31 attack is not the only cyber attack that CSIS and the CSE are aware of, then it raises questions about how many other attacks have there been, the nature of them, when they occurred, who directed them, and whether parliamentarians that were the target, were the victims, have been briefed. Because we know in the case of the ATP-31 attack, members were kept in the dark and would have continued to have been kept in the dark but for the unsealed indictment from the U.S. Department of Justice that was released in March of this year. And so it was on that basis that this committee, at the insistence of Conservatives, but I believe ultimately a unanimous vote of this committee, called on the CSE and CSIS to come back to committee. And the response from CSIS and the CSE was to thumb their nose at this committee. They said, no, thank you. We're not interested in coming back before this committee. They thumbed their nose at this committee, at parliamentary scrutiny. And the justification that was offered was that they had come in June. Yes, they did come in June, and they provided some, it was useful to have them here before this committee. But there are documents that were provided to this committee in the summer that raise questions that need to be put to them and that we need to get answers to in order to complete this study in a fulsome fashion. And I cited some of the questions that need to be asked in relation to the documents that CSE and CSIS did produce. I would have thought that could, based on the limited documents, relatively limited number of documents that had been provided over the summer, that could have been done in one sitting, where we had CSIS and the CSE appear before this committee. And there seemed to be some level of recognition from all members of the committee about the need to hear from CSIS and CSE, and a view that they could come here and we could ask them questions and then see at that point whether we would be in a position to essentially wrap up the study. But now we find out, or we found out, I guess on Friday, that there has been a massive document dump from CSIS and the CSE. I haven't had a chance to go through those documents. Remember that CSIS and the CSE, this government, were required to turn over the documents by August 9th. And somehow, more than 3 months later, we have a document dump. And then, when I asked Madam Clerk whether there were any further documents that are to be turned over from CSIS and the CSE, she said there was a, and I'm paraphrasing her, I'm not quoting her directly, but a large volume of documents that still haven't been produced to this committee. And not only have they not been produced, we don't even have a timeline as to when the CSE and CSIS will be producing those documents and making them available to this committee, even though the only deadline that matters is the August 9th deadline, a deadline that this government has defied and has seemingly no interest in abiding by. A document dump on Friday, a voluminous number of other outstanding documents that they say they'll turn over whenever they feel like it because they can't even provide a timeline. And the Liberal members across the way are confused as to why this motion has been brought forward. I mean, I think it's quite astounding that this committee certain members of this committee would be prepared to wrap up the study without having the opportunity to question CSIS and the CSE about the documents that they have produced, which raise new questions, and about their failure to produce other documents and to have the ability to question them about whatever is contained in the document dump that came more than 3 months after they were ordered to produce the documents. I think it's pretty reasonable. In fact, it's the only responsible thing to do is to say, hold on, let's look at the documents, let's get all the documents, let's bring in CSIS and the CSE so that we as a committee are in a position to ask questions with all of the documents, not some of the documents, but when we questioned them, we had almost no documents. And so it is necessary that we hear from CSIS and the CSE and that we get the documents. And there's an interesting and frankly troubling parallel between what is happening here and what is happening with respect to the Green Slush Fund documents. Because the government has said, well, we've turned over documents, some are redacted, others are withheld, but just stop the debate in the House, shut it down, and turn it over to PROC. And PROC can figure it out. Well, if there's anything that one could have learned from this, is that with this government, the approach that they take is to say to PROC, we're going to thumb our nose at your committee. We'll turn over the documents that we wish to provide. We'll hold back other documents. We'll dump other documents months after they were ordered to turn them over. And we'll do it just as you're about to. We will hold back documents even though you're about to shut down your study, thinking that you had all of the documents in front of you. I mean, it's one big game. It's one big charade with this government. And they have demonstrated that they can't be trusted, that they have no interest in working to be transparent. And so it is why, based on what we have seen with this study, why Conservatives are not going to relent in the House. Until this government stops thumbing its nose at Parliament and turns over all of the documents related to the Green Slush Fund on an unredacted basis to the law clerk, so that the law clerk can then turn those documents over to the RCMP, so that the RCMP can take whatever steps they may wish to take in relation to a scandal involving 400 million taxpayer dollars, including 330 million taxpayer dollars that involved conflicts of interest amongst board members. 186 conflicts of interest, 186 conflicts of interest identified by the Auditor General. But it's what we have seen in terms of the government's obstruction is that what we've seen in terms of this government's obstruction is part of a pattern of how they have shown time and again disrespect to Parliament. I mean, we can think back to the Winnipeg lab scandal, which involved a significant national security breach. And they were ordered, the government was ordered by Parliament to turn over the documents pertaining to the Winnipeg lab. And the government refused to do so. That resulted in another prima facie question of privilege as determined by the Speaker of the House. Isn't it part of a pattern, all of these questions of privilege relating to refusal of this government to turn over documents? And what did the Liberals do? What did the Prime Minister do? Well, he took the Speaker of the House, the member for Nipissing to Miskaming.
You have to say that to get it on the record because you have the floor.
Okay, colleagues.
We do not consent to adjourn.
Well, colleagues, I'm going to read the standing order here, okay? And in the standing order 710, the committee chair cannot adjourn the meeting without the consent of a majority of members unless the chair decides that a case of disorder or misconduct is so serious as to prevent the committee from continuing its work. I don't know if I have the majority of committee members consenting to adjourn. So I'm looking around the table to see if I have I've read the standing order verbatim. So do I have, I'm looking to this side, I'm looking to the NDP, Madame Gaudreau. Okay. I don't have unanimous consent from the Conservatives, but I have consent of the majority of committee. So the meeting is adjourned.
That way, point of order doesn't work that way.